Let's get now to Eugene Lang, assistant professor in the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University, has a distinguished record of service at senior levels in the public service, the federal public service. Really appreciate you. Oh, I mean, you wrote an op-ed in the Globe and Mail, and it was highlighted headlined Justin Trudeau's barren business legacy. And your thesis is that this government or his government did not provide the support that previous Liberal governments have to business or listen to them as much. Give us an example, maybe one or two examples of where you think they neglected business.
Well, basically, the government's been heavily focused prior to, during, and after the pandemic on what I would call redistribution, taking tax revenue and moving it around, creating new programs, borrowing money mostly to finance new initiatives. It's been focused largely on that. And I'm not suggesting that business people should be necessarily running the government. I'm not suggesting the government should be run by a bunch of Elon Musks running amok or anything like that. What I am suggesting is that the business voice needs to be heard and listened to within the government to provide a countervailing force to a natural tendency that Liberal governments have to spend, oftentimes spending money that they don't have, to not be very concerned about markets, incentives, productivity, all the things that matter to business. That countervailing force really hasn't existed in Mr. Trudeau's government the way it did in previous Liberal governments, and I think it's going to be one of the legacies of his government, and it's one of the shortcomings of his governments, all three of his governments, in my view.
For example, the Liberals under Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin did a better job of listening to business?
Well, they had ministers in their government that voiced basically the concerns of business. They tended to be a minority in those cabinets, don't get me wrong, but they were a powerful minority that was listened to. They had a big impact, for example, on the government's efforts to tackle the deficit, a big impact on the government's decisions to privatize underperforming crown corporations, and later on, towards the end of the Chrétien government, towards the effort to significantly reduce corporate income taxes. So there was a balance that was struck. And my point is governments need to strike that balance. Good governments need to strike that balance between an agenda focused on redistribution and an agenda focused on growth and wealth creation. You can't redistribute what you don't have.
You instance Navdeep Bains, Mr. Trudeau's first industry minister. You say that he tried to put innovation into the heart of the government's agenda, but ended up leaving.
Early on, you might recall that he launched a major consultation on innovation that led to a so-called innovation strategy, about the fourth or fifth we've seen in the last 30 years, that was published. Most people forget about it because it really led to very little. I think he made an effort in that connection, as did Mr. Morneau, the finance minister, in the first mandate and a half with his Council on Economic Growth, a group of distinguished business people and scholars that were trying to advise on innovation, productivity, trade diversification, and so on. Issued a number of reports in that connection, and they were largely ignored by the government.
I mean, the government has subsidized green industries. I'm thinking about the battery plants. Of course, there's been some stumbling there, the troubles of North Power, for example. But you think they could have done a lot more?
Well, I think you're right that they've selected certain favored industries to subsidize, the ones you mentioned in particular. Whether that's an effective or efficient approach remains to be seen. But in terms of a broadly pro-business agenda, either on the regulatory side or the tax side, it really hasn't been there. There hasn't been much concern about the impact of regulation on business. We know from surveys of businesses that it's probably the number one impediment to investment and growth, according to businesses, both large, medium, and small businesses. The government's done nothing on regulatory reform. It's done nothing on tax reform, really, for business. So in terms of a broad pro-business framework or an impulse, it really hasn't been there. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't been there is these business-oriented ministers just didn't exist in the Trudeau government the way they did in previous governments.
I know what you mean about regulation. When I encounter or business people tell me about the bureaucracy, the red tape they need to deal with. I mean, even me as a consumer, a householder, I'm horrified by bureaucracy. I cannot imagine trying to run a business.
Yeah. Well, it's, as I say, it's been identified in a number of business surveys as the number one impediment to growth and investment that businesses have to make to be productive and profitable.
We're very tight for time. Do you think if Mr. Poilievre, the Tories, became Prime Minister, do you think things would get significantly better in the near term?
I have no idea. It really depends. So far, he has articulated a rather hostile large business rhetoric, at least, and not particularly favorable towards large corporations. I think his views on business and on economic policy generally remain rather opaque. Now, you would normally assume that a conservative government would be somewhat more pro-business, but I think that remains to be seen. The jury's still out.
That's a good point. He has condemned what he says as excessive power of large corporations. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Thank you very much for joining us.